Okay, so go ahead and drop a few things in the chat that you guys are grateful for today. I'm grateful for a sunny day. I'm grateful for a roof over my head. Grateful for some drinking water, some good food, just life. Grateful for a good job in network marketing. I feel that one. Super important. Grateful for waking up this morning and going to my new job. Congratulations. Grateful for my biz coach and early mornings, for caffeine, yes. Grateful for life. Beautiful. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, but my call is going to be on the subconscious mind and kind of navigating it and just learning a little bit more about it. So we live in a day and age where we have endless resources and endless opportunities, but so many people who have the best opportunities at their fingertips seem to perform very mediocrely. And if you look back at like Helen Keller, Oprah, Einstein, like Colonel Sanders, these are all people who had such limited resources, yet they were able to achieve such miracles in their lifetime. And we really want to dive into why they were able to do that. Like, for instance, when Einstein dropped out at 15 and he failed his entrance exam to Zurich Polytechnic, and Colonel Sanders retired at 65 and he was broke. He didn't start KFC until after he retired. And so, how was all of this possible for them with such a lack of resources, yet we have all of these resources and people still seem to perform mediocre? Well, if you look, like if you study any of these lives of the people that I just mentioned, like it's basically a master class on how to achieve success without any resources. And this is because the main reason that we perform so under our potential is because our nervous system is hardwired for comfort, and our essence of what makes us us, our soul, is hardwired for growth. So the trick is managing the dynamic tension and how good the comfort zone feels and the innate calling of our potential that lies outside of that causes frustration for most people, and it keeps us on like a hamster wheel of mediocrity. So what sets apart the human brain from any other animal is the front neocortex of the frontal lobe, and it operates at a brain wavelength of alpha and beta, and it's not turned on until age 7. Until age 7, we're operating in delta and theta, so it's basically on sleep. So to generalize it, we have no critical thinking. So there's a quote by Aristotle, and he says, "Give me a child at 7 years for 7 years, and I'll give you the man." And this is like very prevalent in children, which is why it's so important to be careful what you say. Because say, for instance, you had a really long day and you have all these bills that are overdue, your car just got totaled and it's in the shop, you have all of this stuff going on, things aren't going well in your relationship and you're stressed out, and you take your child shopping with you and they ask you for a candy bar and you say no, but children are prime examples of our ability to be persistent, right? So they ask and they ask and they ask, and just to keep them quiet, you snap at them and say, no, you're not worthy, you're not good enough, and you're not deserving. And you think that'll shut up the child and just you can move on and continue go back to thinking about your big real life problems. But this is like very dangerous because something very important just happened there, because subconsciously you're calling out the behavior and you're like kind of instilling this belief into them subconsciously. So they will, for many, many years in the future, subconsciously be acting out this behavior, trying to prove why you're right. And so they will eventually as adults, self-sabotage at the threat of success when it comes along to challenge that inner model of the world. And there's an undisputed first law in psychology when it comes to personal growth, and that is this. It's that people will never rise above their opinion of themselves. I'll say that again. People never rise above their opinion of themselves. Now, it's a lot harder to challenge the opinion because it's largely formed in our childhood years, sub 7, and the perception of where we think we did or didn't get love from the people that we wanted it the most. So that's where all of this comes from, and it builds up to age 7. So it comes from the perception of where we think we did or didn't get love from the people we wanted it the most. And that is what builds who you are. And once you hit age 7, everything from there on is a decision built on top of another decision. And all of this is based off of the model of the world that you were given up until age 7. So we kind of mirror that first law in relationships as well. And we say that no one can ever love us more than we love ourselves. That is the other first law when it comes to relationships, that no one can ever love us more than we love ourselves, which is why it's so important to practice self-growth and to be conscious of these things. And especially if you have children, to be conscious of the words that you're using. And the challenge here is that we're creatures of habit. So we tend to fall into this cycle, and we only use our conscious brain 5% of the time. 95% of the time we're on autopilot. So that's where it gets tricky, because you can only fix this when you're conscious of it, which is why, like for monks, for instance, it's like instilled in to be conscious in the present moment, because the more conscious and aware you are in the moment, the easier it's going to be to correct your behavior. But like I said, we're creatures of habit, so that's the challenge. And the prefrontal cortex of the neocortex, that serves as our decision making. So it's prime real estate, because our body, for instance, is 150, or our brain is 150 of our body weight, and it takes up 20% of all calories. So your brain is very important. And the more you work on the brain, the easier the rest of the stuff comes. So when we use our frontal lobe, the trick here is that evolution has given us shortcuts, because the neocortex, it takes a lot to make decisions, and you only have a limited amount of decisions that you can make every day, which is why evolution created shortcuts for us. So like, if your brain is like clearly using intelligence to make decisions, like for instance, say you do something repetitively over and over again, your brain just assumes that you're using intelligence to make the decision, so it should be a good decision. Your brain doesn't care what the decision is. It's just, if you continue to repeat that decision, your brain just kind of makes it a habit. So when, like for instance, when you choose fries over salad, your brain doesn't care. Its job is to adapt. So that's why you always just go for the fries. You have a go-to drink, you have a go-to route, for instance. Your brain doesn't care, it just adapts. That's what it's for. Your brain is there for you to like guide you. So it kind of picks up on the signals that you have. And like I said, it creates shortcuts, because the least work that it has to do, the better for it, not for us. So that's the thing, is when you repeat over and over again, it becomes a habit. Rather than taking up space with critical thinking, you do things very subconsciously, which is why 95% of the time you're not actually thinking consciously, you're using your subconscious. So it's meant to serve you intelligently, and it hands things over to the midbrain, so it becomes unconscious, hence a habit. So now you order fries just because that's what you do. You don't even question it. You just always order fries. And it's useful, like when you're doing things like learning how to walk, and you don't have to think about learning how to walk every day, but it sets up challenges when it comes to our beliefs in the world and our beliefs about ourselves. So for instance, like say you were driving, I'm sure this happens to a lot of us, but you're driving for a while and then you go a couple miles and you're like, oh shit, like did I run any red lights? Like I hope I was doing good. And it's like that's because you're so used to the route that your brain shuts off sort of and you go on autopilot. And that's basically your midbrain at work. And that's exactly what that is. So the deeper challenge as creatures of habit is the fact that we're using our conscious brain only a small amount of time. And the rest of the time, I like to call it sleeping awake. So that's 95% of the time you're sleeping awake. So the conscious mind, it's kind of like an ant. It's industrious, it's hardworking, it's determined, and it gets the job done. But the thing is, you have to set goals. And okay, so here's the thing. Think of it like a compass kind of. And so you're setting goals to march north, right? So say that the ant, for instance, is marching north. And it thinks that it's being consistent and it's like determined, and you think that you're getting places because you're marching north. But the problem is you're marching north on the back of an elephant that's heading south. The elephant is your subconscious mind. So you think that you're heading north, you think you're making progress, but really you have this big elephant that you're walking on top of that's walking the complete other direction. So and that elephant represents your limiting beliefs and those patents that you kind of put the model of the world in place, and all of those unresolved self issues go on there on the elephant. So you start to see why we self-sabotage without even meaning to, and without even realizing that we're self-sabotaging. So how do you get the elephant moving in the right direction? It's like the compass needle, and it only points one direction at a time. So when we operate the 5% of the time in the conscious mind, we use our free will. And that's when we're able to adjust and make different decisions. So it's like grabbing the compass needle and pointing it anywhere we want, which is what free will allows us to do. So like, for instance, if you're feeling down, like you would watch a comedy, you would like, instead of just feeling down and sitting in that moment, you would choose to call a friend, watch a comedy. Like if you have low energy, that's when you make the decision to make a coffee or grab an energy drink. And that is considered like changing the needle, pulling the needle in a different direction. So the thing is though, when you're not being conscious, the 95% of the time, the needle will always drift back to the default position. And unfortunately for most people, that's more negative than positive, especially because we're born with a negativity bias and our brain likes to connect things because we like to connect the dots. We can't just have space in the middle of things that we don't understand, which is why it's like so important to not assume things, because your brain will automatically go into a negative direction. So that's the challenge, is basically you want to kind of, okay, so this is the thing, this is the biggest challenge. And I would say you want to tattoo this on the back of your brain. So it's environment trumps will. And that's what's so important, because we're mostly subconscious. So environment trumps will. And the intention will always be beaten by the environment over time, which is why it's so, so important to surround yourself with the right people in the right headspace and in the right environment in general, because it doesn't matter how much will you have, the environment will always win. So for instance, say that you're a music fan, but you hate jazz music, you can't stand it, or you love country music, you only listen to country music, but your car breaks down and your coworker that lives right next door offers to drive you to work for the next week. And it's about a 45-minute drive, but they only listen to jazz music. So it doesn't matter what you think consciously, you can hate it the whole time. I love jazz too, but you can think like you hate it the whole time. But I guarantee you within 3 days in the car, you'll be tapping your feet like to the beat. And in 5 days, you'll be humming it in the shower. And we don't get to choose like whether or not we get programmed. We're programmable by design. and we can only choose how we want to be programmed. So that's why it's so important to do your personal development, to surround yourself with the right people, to be doing the right activities for yourself and for your growth, because you are going to be programmed whether you like it or not. It's just a matter of what you're programming yourself with. So you can have all the intention to be, for instance, like warm and hot, and you can raise your body temperature and put on clothes. But if you choose to live in the freezer, the environment's going to win over time. And you can read all the affirmations you want. You can stand in front of the mirror and say you believe in yourself. But if you live with someone who's constantly putting you down, someone who's reminding you you're not good enough or why it won't work, at some point, you're going to start to believe it too. And so that's considered the law of conformity. And for instance, if you hang around with 9 drug users, you're going to become the 10th. But if you hang around with 9 people who look at life through the lens of how we can and why we can't, then you hold up mirrors for each other, which is personally what I love so much about this community, is that we are constantly holding mirrors up to each other and hyping each other up. And that's what's so special, is that it's so rare to find. I love you too, T. So that's why it's important to surround yourself with the right people who are saying that you can, because you truly can. Like, if you really think about it, a side note here, like, anything that's been done before you, you can do too. It's just you have to have the right plan and the right environment in place. But if it's possible, there's no reason that you can't do it too. You just don't have the plan yet, but that's okay. So that's why you got to surround yourself with the right people. And greatness, you have to kind of be great, you have to be midwives to each other's dreams instead of stealing them. And you'll likely become the 10th, or you'll leave the environment. So the 95% law is the law of conformity, because 95% of the time we're taking things in subconsciously and we're not actually using our brain, because if we used our brain 100% of the time, we would be exhausted. So how do we change that? There's 3 tips that I have for you guys to help turn it around. So number 1, stop putting the wrong things in. We are adaptation machines. So stop putting the wrong things in. And our physical bodies adapt to environment. We don't get to choose that. We only get to choose the environment that we put them in. This is why I keep stressing this, you guys. It's so, so important, because it doesn't matter how much will you have. Your environment will always win. So if it's the gym or if it's McDonald's, your body doesn't care. Its job is to adapt. Your soul cares, because your soul wants to grow. Your body doesn't give a crap. Your body's job is to adapt to what you do to it. So it's the same with our mind. We have to stop putting the wrong programming in, because it's all about programming. And every decision you make, every environment you're in, every choice that you make, you're programming your mind, whether you realize it or not. So the 2 big things that impact us subconsciously more than anything else is mainstream media and the peer group of whom we hang out with. So the job of the media is to stimulate the amygdala, which is a part of your brain that's designed evolutionarily to notice negative before positive. So it hooks our attention of the mass in the crowd, and it's a record of viewing stats to basically justify rates. And the media in general, the media is not a charity. They're a business. So yes, the information can be important, but the way that it's given to you is tailored negatively on purpose. So they're just trying to make money. They're just trying to raise their statistics. It's not about the information. And that's the problem with mainstream media. So for instance, the guy, he's a psychologist. His name is Patras. He hasn't watched a news report or a paper or read a paper in 17 years. And he says that he cannot watch news and be positive, because if you want to be happy, like for instance, not just for news, but in general, like if you want to be happy or you want to be healthy, but you smoke, it's not going to work. So like you can go to the gym all you want, but if you're smoking, you're not going to be healthy. It's a binary equation. So you're being programmed by mainstream media, and you can't have a default magnetic north if you're moving away from being negative. It's consistent programming. So Patras, for instance, like I said, he hasn't read anything or watched the news in 17 years. So people ask him a lot, like, how does he know what's going on in the world? And he says this. He says everything is going on in the world, which is actually true. That's another philosophy law, is that everything that you can possibly think of, any scenario, is happening in the world right now. So everything's going on in the world. The better question would be, what do you choose to focus on? So think of it like the Amazon rainforest at night, and everything is going on in the rainforest, right? But you take a flashlight and you point it at the ground and you say, look, that snake's eating a rat. And it's like, yeah, that's cool, but have a look at this hummingbird being born. It's a choice. It's a choice of what you're putting into your body, what you're programming yourself with. So he says this, he says, you have no clue what's going on in the world, but you should have every clue what's going on in your world. And if something is important enough, it will find you. Because obviously we all know what's going on right now. A lot of big stuff is happening, but you don't have to watch the news to know that. If it's important enough, it will find you. So stop programming yourself with why the world won't work, and start taking charge of where you point your flashlight. So for instance, your peer group, you probably change friends, and most of us should, but you can't change your family. And so for instance, say that your sister is the most negative person you know, or your mother-in-law is always telling you you're not good enough for your son, or whatever it may be. If you're looking at reasons to choose, like parents, like the best advice that I can give for family is boundaries, because you want to protect your energy and you want to protect what you're programming yourself in. You can't get rid of family, but you can set boundaries. So I always say this, you have to love your family. You don't have to, but you have to love your family, but you get to choose your friends, which is why I said your peer group is so important. You have to be careful who you're surrounding yourself with. So that's number one. The second thing is you have to start putting the right things in. So there's a time, we're in a time in society where there's so much great information. There's all these podcasts, there's all these YouTube videos, these inspirational interviews, these books, these lives of these people. We all know, we all send it to each other every day. Like there's so much valuable information and positive information that can help you grow and help you put the right things in. So that's like, for instance, doing all of that stuff is taking the compass needle and remagnetizing it in a positive direction. And by exposing yourself to that, it supports your potential for greatness, which is where we want to go. And there's no excuse for not being able to grow in society when all of this stuff is so available to us at our fingertips, literally. And it was not like this before. So by not choosing to do that, by default, we're hooked onto somebody else's agenda. And if you don't start filming yourself as the star in the movie of your life, by default, you're going to end up as an extra in somebody else's. So that's why it's so important to make sure that you're focusing on you and that you're focusing on the things that you're working on instead of just going with the flow and accepting what people are giving to you. So the third thing is that you need to get the things that shouldn't be in there out, hence the habits and the things that we learned up until age 7. And that's where, very important, this is where you work with a decent mentor or a coach that understands how to navigate the minefield of human behavior. which is why it's always like said that it's so important that you choose the right mentor, because they have to know how to help you and they have to understand the minefield of human behavior, because that's where things happen and that's where you grow and that's where habits are formed. I feel like we all have a pretty good grasp of that, which is why I feel like we're in such a good place in this business, because we're all able to recognize when our behaviors are negative and not positive, and we're able to help each other shift. And it's just such a beautiful thing. But that's the most important thing, is getting the things that shouldn't be in there out. And like I said, once you hit age 7, it becomes a lot harder to do that. But it's good to hold each other accountable, which is why if we all do that to each other, we know, but it's so important to have people holding you accountable and have people putting you in check and being aware of your behavior and teaching you better ways to improve as a person in order to grow. So it has to be somebody that isn't just going to teach you skills, but somebody that can reach in and find those unconscious patterns and be able to rip them out for good, which is why we're always sending each other personal development. We're not letting each other talk negative about ourselves. We're literally helping each other move that needle in a positive direction. So, for example, there was a client of mine that wanted to learn time management, and any normal coach would have just taught him time management, like in 2 minutes. But like within 2 minutes, 3 minutes of talking to him, it was easy to tell time management was not the problem. Time management was not the problem. The real issue was the inability to deal with rejection. And he wasn't saying no to people, because saying no triggered a rejection response. And saying no too much, so he wasn't saying no enough. So he had too much on his calendar and thought he needed time management, when that wasn't the case at all. The case was he needed to deal with his fear of rejection, which was instilled in him before he was 7 years old. Okay, so that's why it's so important to pay attention to the real issues behind, like the back end of things, you know? So once you're able to start addressing all of these things, our unconscious mind starts to create new habits that we can program self-consciously. So that's like grabbing the compass needle and bringing it over to the right direction. And that's when we can start achieving the real game in town, which is self-mastery. It's the most important thing you can do for yourself is self-mastery. And before you spend another penny on workshops or skills or anything, you need to work on yourself. Because it's one thing to take in all this knowledge, but it's another thing to apply it. So you need to work on yourself. And mastering the game of self-mastery has been the #1 recommendation of virtually everyone that's achieved it and that preached the benefits of it to people that usually weren't listening. But by mastering our sense of self, we're able to walk into a room where everything is descending into chaos and retain our center. And when everything is breaking down around us, we are the eye of the storm. And it's like, move, I'll handle it. So that's the best way that you'll be able to handle uncertainty. When we commit to self-mastery, we give ourselves the best shot of becoming the best and greatest version of ourselves that we can be. And it's not the imposition that nobody changes because you tell them to. This is the thing, is no one's going to change because you tell them to. People change because they are inspired to change. So we can only inspire them because we are the example and we are the invitation to change. But you cannot change someone by telling them to change. You can only inspire them by showing up as someone who is self-mastered and letting them see you, which is why you got to show up online and you got to show people your growth, because you're inspiring them and you're giving them the invitation to change, because they will not change if you tell them to. So at that point, we have a chance at being able to really make a change in this world and to really make a difference, which is what the world needs right now. And ultimately, be the embodiment of, for instance, what Gandhi said, Be the change you wish to see in the world. And all of this is done through self-mastery. So that is all I have for you guys today. If you have any questions for me or you have anything you want to add, feel free to unmute yourself or add it in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.